Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Lauren Elizabeth here with me. Thank you so much, Lauren, for joining me. I met Lauren on social media where you had written this beautiful post about about how exploitive capitalism is perpetuating collective harm and trauma. And I can't remember the exact details of the post, but I was like, oh, somebody else is talking about this. I'm so excited. So I invited you to come on the show, and I'm super glad that you agreed to come on the show with us. As many of listeners might know, I've talked about this numerous times, and in my offerings, my business offerings, I endeavor to be quite revolutionary, to make my offerings available to everyone, no matter where they land in the, structures, the socioeconomical structures of our society, and make reparations for people that have been underserved or left out or excluded or exploited and all of that. And so to remedy the disparities in privilege that we all experience if we don't meet the narrow requirements of what it means to be a successful, real person in the capitalist exploitation models. And so, so I was super excited to have you on here and wanted you to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more. What got you so passionate and articulate about these topics? And how do you feel it relates to womb-centered healing?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Sama. Well, I guess my name is Lauren Elizabeth, and I am coming to y'all from the land that is now called Newberg, Oregon, but it's actually the unceded and traditional lands of the Yamhill Kalapuya people. I start there on my interviews and workshops and any sort of trainings that I'm recording, just to sort of highlight the harmful system that we've been born into, and also to just really acknowledge the responsibility that we all have to restore justice. So thanks for letting me start there.
Lauren, just to add, I like to say too that I am coming from Lake County, California, which is the unceded land of the Pomo. So to add that too. So we're recognizing that we're both sitting on unceded lands of peoples.
Yeah, thank you, Sama. I come from those. I mean, that's where I was raised, was on the land of Pomo in Sonoma County. Okay. So I have roots there. Okay. Yeah, thank you for adding that. I'm a coach. I work with business owners, primarily coaches, healers, and creatives who kind of feel like misfits in their industry and who want to bring their work into alignment with their values and their vision for the future and for change. And I'm really focusing on developing what I call community-powered business models. And it's sort of an iterative process. I think I'm still figuring out exactly what that looks like, but it's really exciting to be working with my clients and with these folks who have a really big vision for what's possible for us as humans on this planet. And yeah, we're working out what it looks like to build business outside of capitalism. I came to this work when I first got into coaching. I was helping primarily women or folks who have been socialized as women to align their business and their personal lives with the moon and with their menstrual cycles. So that's kind of how I got into coaching. And I started to notice this pattern of folks around me really sort of bypassing the sort of sticky parts around, I was in community with lots of other coaches who were doing similar work. And I noticed this pattern of just like really integrated capitalism. We're talking about like honoring our cycles in one note, right? And then in the next breath, we're talking about these like making 10K months and this like hustle culture. And I was really seeing a disconnect between what we were talking about, what we're trying to heal, what we're trying to create, and then like the systems and practices that we're using to get there. And so in 2018, I sort of like put my business on mini pause in the earlier half of the year, and did some sort of deep soul searching and dove really kind of headfirst into some anti-racism education and some anti-oppression education. And what I found was that so much of my spiritual practices, so much of my the way that I did business, even as someone who was aware of like these harms, and even as someone who was trying to resist them, so much of what I in capitalism was rooted in white supremacy, and was rooted in just like this patriarchal system that really doesn't serve any of us except for, you know, those very few at the very top. And it made me really sad. And for a while, I kind of like pulled back from all of my spiritual practices. I sort of went on just hiatus and got really angry and really sad, really a lot of grief. And it was, of course, it was, you know, happened for a reason. I was able to get back in connection with my ancestors. I was able to really start listening to my body. And it's led me to this coaching practice where I'm weaving, you know, politics and somatics and an awareness of trauma and an awareness of justice into the way that I help people build businesses. I'm really passionate about business because I think it's one of the sort of main drivers within the capitalist system. And I think that it's sort of like our Trojan horse, which I also think is a very problematic analogy, right? The Trojan War was based on like stealing a woman away from her own sovereign choices. But yeah, it's like this way I can see using business, I can visualize us using business as a tool to dismantle capitalism, because if we do things differently with our businesses, we're changing the culture. And so I'm really passionate about helping people build businesses in a way that's not subscribing to the sort of business as usual paradigm, that's really helping folks deprogram from all these stories we've learned about how we're supposed to be in a capitalist system, and really reimagining what we can do with our work, really reimagining what we can create, the kinds of communities we can build. And it's just been definitely a roller coaster, but one that I'm so grateful to be writing and so grateful to be sharing with your listeners today.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to I have some questions that I want to carry the conversation forward with, but I also have this one piece that I want to go back to, which is something that you said, that the system only benefits the people that are at the top. And what I want to speak to is that benefit is an illusory benefit, because it creates an illusion of power through the domination model of relationship, that they have power over everyone else. But having power over someone else that steals power, resources, energy, nourishment from others, so that that person who's got that power over has more than everyone else, actually diminishes that person's inner power, which is the true power that we're all longing for. And so the people at the top are starving to death whilst thinking they have everything that they need. And that's what creates this greed cycle of inner emptiness that makes the richer than rich people continue to exploit more and more and more to the detriment of everyone.
Yeah, thank you for adding that nuance. That's totally it. It.
Right. And this is what I talk about a lot with the womb-centered healing. We can return to this sense of a caring economy, which, caring professions and caring for each other activities have been excluded from this capitalist model of economy for so long that that's the root of many of the problems. And and I'm with you with the business being a central part of the revolution of change and evolution, is that if we, and there's precedent for this, because many businesses that are starting to include caring for staff, caring for the community, caring for the environment, are proving hand over fist that this is a much more sustainable and profitable method of running your business.
Yeah.
And everyone's evolving to the point where it's sickening to be manipulated by typical marketing tactics anymore. And they're working less and less effectively and requiring those who are bought into it to work more and more hard at convincing everyone that it's okay that they're being coerced.
Yeah. That's so, I'm really grateful you brought up that nuance, because one of the things that has been, a part of my anti-racism journey and like learning about my own privilege is that while, my privilege as a white cisgendered woman living in the United States, that position has given me, a certain level of power, right? But it's also left me starving for my authentic culture. It's left me feeling really disconnected from community. I was saying during the early months of COVID, I was living with my parents in a neighborhood that I grew up in, people that have known me my whole lives. And I still felt so isolated, because it's just like, we're all trying to find this like truth of what it means to be in community. And I'm not diminishing the value of the neighborhood and the community that my parents live in. We're very lucky to have those people, but it was even in a community of folks that I've known most of my life, there's still this disconnection that is just really heartbreaking. And I really am grateful that you brought that up, because you're right, that this sort of idea of power, it's the illusion of power, because we've extracted all of the power from what we're creating, or from ourselves, to try and create this sort of like facade of hierarchy. And it's not good for us, and it makes healing, and it makes building community and building systems of care really hard. And it just makes me,
it's built on the dismantling of those systems of care, and that those systems of community that were nourishing us for hundreds of thousands of years before. There's one philosophy of theory of how did this patriarchal system get started, and that goes back to a collective trauma that created the Gulf of Mexico, like a big asteroid hits the planet. This is a theory. It's the only thing I've heard that makes sense of why would we be in this self-destructive trauma loop collectively, right? And that knocks a planet off of its axis, whereas before it had the same axis, so that there was constant food supply in certain areas of the planet, and everybody could be in this, sort of Garden of Eden state, womb reverential state of like, wow, womb bearers menstruate monthly, understand how life works, and can make new people. Right? There's new people. There's like womb reverential culture of like partnership between all members of humanity. And then boom, big traumatic ecological event that then creates this rift between the logical thinking brain and the feminine hindbrain, which is a common result of trauma. But this collective rift, and then these people that start having to plan ahead and get really into the logical thinking to have food, and then people who kind of lose it, and then there's a whole like defending your territory thing, because it just created this whole collective trauma loop that it's taking us so many hundreds of thousands of years to get to the point of saying, we need to heal from this, and even understand how to heal from trauma like that, just on an individual level, and then how do we apply this to a collective level? So it sounds like this kind of trauma awareness is woven into some of the work that you do around helping people with business to recognize all of this and to come at their business structures and strategies from a place that doesn't perpetuate the harm of exploitive capitalism. Could you talk a little bit about that? How do you incorporate this trauma awareness and into your business strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'm like continuing to explore. Something that I'm really careful about is like promising safe spaces. We all have so much internal bias that we're not aware of, and often we're operating from these like very conditioned spaces, and also like very traumatized spaces. And so part of my work is just acknowledging that, right? Just acknowledging that so often we're like operating from this, this very conditioned state. And kind of just bringing that to the surface with my clients, often like, the lights just start going off. One of the things, when I'm talking about this, sort of the big thing that comes to mind is like in marketing. And of course it's spread across all different kinds of aspects of business. But the thing that kind of comes to mind and that I want to talk about is how marketing and the way that we sort of have been taught to get the word out about our work is so predatory and really leverages people's trauma in order to get them to feel like they need this product. And so what I'm kind of encouraging my clients to explore is like, what if instead of leading with pain points and leading with shame and leading with sort of stirring the fear pot, what if we led with vision? What if we led with values? What if we call our potential clients in to imagine a better world? And there's actually some research to support that this is a beneficial and a really positive way. Like people respond to this sort of like positive positioning rather than the sort of shame, fear marketing. And one of the women that I've been learning marketing from, her name is Kelly Deals. She's a feminist copywriter and marketing educator. Has done her own sort of research to see like, okay, if I use the typical sort of like pain point, then call to action versus if I use, this sort of rally cry for our vision and our values. And she has seen also in her work that people are more likely to respond to an aligned vision. They're more likely to respond to shared values than to respond to shame and pain and sort of the sort of icky typical marketing that we see. So that's just one aspect where I'm like kind of, asking my clients to think about who their people are and to acknowledge how capitalism, how this sort of trauma cycle that we're all living in may have impacted them, and to be really aware of that in the way that they're speaking. Just sort of like one example is, I ask my clients to, when they're talking about these sort of, in business, it's important to understand the struggles of your people, right? We still need to identify them and we still want to speak to those issues. But if I say like, aren't you sick of all the capitalism and all the things that suck in the world? Whoever I'm talking to or whoever's reading that piece of content or listening to me, all of a sudden they start to feel that personal pressure. And it doesn't feel good. It doesn't even feel good for me to say, like, I feel weird even just saying it on this recording.
Yeah.
But instead, if I say like, capitalism has harmed people, capitalism has harmed our communities. These systems of oppression are keeping the human family from coming together. It sort of separates the you and makes it more about the collective. And it gives people the opportunity to like opt in to resonating with it. Right? It gives people the opportunity to say, oh yeah, that feels like something I'm experiencing, rather than kind of pointing the finger at people
and poking.
It's like letting people opt in. And I just think that's just one way that I'm weaving sort of this trauma awareness into the work that I'm doing with my clients.
Such a nuance. And then that second way that you said it opens this door of this is what's happening. Let's come together and create solutions. Whereas the other one says, you feel this awful way and buy my product so that you can stop feeling that way. Whereas,
and if you don't, it's your fault. If you don't invest, it's your fault.
Right. And there's so many coercive narratives that go along with what you just said there, right? If you don't do it, there's something wrong with you. It's your fault. You're not investing in you. I mean, all of those narratives are so coercive. I studied psychology in undergrad at UC Davis, and I'm realizing more and more that was such a powerful training for me, because a lot of the research that was given as educational to, as what helped people learn about psychology for the last number of decades has been research on marketing and what gets people to buy stuff that they don't necessarily need. And I was just quoting some research to my husband recently because he loves vanilla. And I remember when one research thing that I studied in college about smells that got people to buy things more. And he's like he's not like measuring out vanilla for the apple crumble, he's like pouring half the bottle in. I'm like, honey, that's a lot of vanilla. I can smell it from here. Are you trying to sell me something? Because the vanilla was the smell that got people to buy more things,
Yeah.
But so just a little humor to lighten that up. But the thing is, that's been this capitalist usurping of not only psychology and understanding our psychology. That's who was has been funding psychological research, but also, a lot of spiritual capitalism and how people, all this. Anyway, I could go on about that.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm just celebrating the nuance that you bring to it and how you demonstrated two different ways of sharing about the same thing, still addressing the issue at hand, but doing it in such a way that draws people in instead of pokes at their pain and can potentially re-traumatize or re-wound somebody just in your marketing material. Right. So I'm like absorbing that for myself and recognizing that in some ways because I've been following Kelly Deals for a while too. And so I've, received her emails, and every once in a while I read one and go, okay, how am I going to implement this? She delivers a lot of impactful, materials and ways of looking at things. And it really resonates with me. And so approaching my work with the womb-centered healing temple from this place of listening within, and what are the core philosophies and the energies that are guiding me making these offerings to the world. And I've fired so many business coaches that, despite being all about soul purpose, entrepreneurship, and all this, are still just promoting this same capitalist approach to everything and coercing people to buy their stuff in ways that are very blatantly unethical. So, I can list a bunch, and I think you may have mentioned things in the post that I saw you read, of ways that typical marketing narratives do that. So like, for example, the one you mentioned earlier of, if you don't buy this, there's something wrong with you. You obviously have a block, and I'm going to coach you through your block. If somebody's trying to coach me through this block that I have, they're saying I have some kind of psychological or spiritual block to investing in myself, and that's why I'm saying this isn't the right program for me. Right. That's coercion. That's unethical. When you're in a sales conversation with somebody about your program, you are ethically the wrong person to be coaching them through any kind of block they may have around spending money on themselves. You're the wrong person to be doing that. They need to work that out with somebody else that is not trying to sell them a program.
Yeah, absolutely.
because there's a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, if they do have that block in the first place, which they may very well not really have a block, they just don't want to buy your program for one reason or another. It's not right for them right now. It's not because they have a block. It could be their inner guidance telling them, no, not now.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And I do just want to mention one other thing. You kind of like grazed on it, and I just want to like kind of go in there a little bit, especially this year, especially since the police murder of George Floyd. I have seen so many people kind of jumping on this diversity, equity, and inclusion train. And a lot of people came to me like, hey, can you help me adjust the copy on my website so that I can be more inclusive? And I just want to say real quickly that like, just because we can talk the talk doesn't mean that we're actually doing the work. And it can be really tempting to like jump on those, even with just like the language that we see being used in the sort of spiritual coaching community, right? Like a word becomes, trauma informed is a great example. People have started saying like, oh, I'm trauma informed. And you ask them like, well, what's your training? And they say, well, I don't have any formal training, but I went and saw this therapist and they told me that I have trauma and then I worked through it. And so now I'm trauma informed. And it's like, okay, well, you have a trauma, you are aware of trauma, and that's wonderful. That's a great step. But we have to be very careful with the way that we present our work, because sometimes the language that we use and the way that we are talking about ourselves doesn't necessarily align up with what we have to offer. And so part of the sort of deprogramming from capitalism is like being really honest about where we're at and what we can hold and how we can serve. Capitalism tells us that we should be able to, meet everyone's needs and bend over backwards for them and like make sure you can do whatever you got to do to get their money, right? Like that's sort of the story. Do whatever you got to do to get their money. But like you were saying, like it's not ethical for us to be coaching people through this money blockage if the money is coming to us. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I think that it's so important for us to be really aware of, this has kind of become a catchphrase, but like, what is our lane? What are we equipped to support people in? And how do we do that in integrity? How do we do that where, as a business owner, yes, profits matter. Like I can't keep doing my business if I don't make a profit, and also if that's the only thing I'm concerned with, if I'm not also wondering like, how does my business impact the environment? How does my business, address political and social issues? I'm just kind of falling into that capitalist cycle. And the thing about these spiritual business owners is that they're talking about healing really important stuff. They're talking about healing childhood wounds. They're helping their clients move through like massive transformations, and that's wonderful. But if we're not addressing the root cause, if we're not saying like, oh yeah, capitalism is actually what's contributing to these issues, and we're also leveraging capitalist tools to kind of position them so that we can support them, it's not aligned. It's not aligned. And kind of what we were saying about the power at the top or the illusion of power, it's kind of the same thing that we see for folks who've become, spiritual influencers leveraging capitalism. And I really want to just like wash my hands of that space and like focus on supporting people who are willing to do the work to do it right.
Yeah. It feels like what you might mean by do it right and really doing the work means to me, when I hear that, it means that we're needing to speak to and address the fundamental disconnection with our own fullness of empowerment, which we spoke a little bit about at the beginning before we got on the recording, which has been something I keep repeating over and over again and feeling and hearing that it really brings us back to womb-centered healing, because in order for this kind of exploitive capitalism to become so widespread and such a world, system around the world, what needed to happen first was to disconnect people from the land and from a harmonious ecological relationship with the land, and who were the keepers of that relationship, but the menstruators. And giving our menstrual blood to the earth and living in harmonious relationship with the perpetuation of life and with those who support us and are included in that, everyone in our community, was deliberately that whole system of community nourishment and connection to the land and deep, bone deep understanding of ecology and the wisdom of connecting with the plants, connecting with the animals, and all of that is deeply nourished by this menstrual connection and the menstrual cycle, and how the whole community was connected through menstruators to that cycle. And that had to be disrupted in order for capitalism to take over like it has. And so that's why the persecution of people and systems, cultures, spiritual practices, and whole peoples that had that intact was central to the capitalist takeover of the world. So the persecution of the witches, the midwives, the herbalists in Europe, to dismantle the community common relationship with the land, the community commons, where people commonly held land. And this is another thing, land ownership, property ownership feels like it's at the fundamental base of the whole capitalist system, and it was only able to be established as a thing by dismantling community land stewardship that was intact in Europe until it was dismantled.
Right. And also here on the island, United States,
and indigenous peoples
and
everywhere.
all over the world.
All over the world, indigenous peoples everywhere, and that's the main reason and way that capitalism takes over, is by the genocide of people that have that connection with the land and that community based relationship with the land, and shared stewardship of the land in common with each other. And so and the center of that is the menstrual connection, I feel, with the land, and sexuality and relationships with each other, and family systems, and all of that. It can be healthy when there is that connection with the land, and that relationship, that stewardship, and that partnership with the land. But that's why capitalism depends on that being disrupted and dismantled, so that it's no longer a community caring for each other. It's a few people hoarding the resources while everyone else has to just scrape by or starve or die. And so I just wanted to mention that this reclamation that so many womb-centered healing practitioners are starting to make of this menstrual connection to the land and nature and all of that, for me, and the way that I am endeavoring to support that, is very revolutionary and intrinsically dismantles. And that's why that whole capitalist system, and that's why so many politicians who want to keep the capitalist system going often attack reproductive rights, and all of that. And so I just wanted to mention a few of those things and see what other reflections you might have along those lines.
like I said, I came into coaching because I had a radical sort of awakening around my own cycles. And I realized like I could tap into this sort of pretty consistent flow, and I could connect it with the way that the world was moving around me. And it was a very almost like psychedelic to like tap in with this power that I was sort of moving through constantly. And I wanted to share that with other women and other menstruators. And it's so interesting because I think and it's so funny I say I feel that we have this sort of disconnection from our body is like very much a part of the sort of capitalist story, and specifically the sort of indoctrination of the European diaspora into whiteness. This idea that like we have to stand up straight and we have to like, you know, it's almost like this. You can look at the way people ate dinner and the way that people went to the bathroom and the way that people danced prior to the sort of European colonization of the world. And it was very, you know, earthy and very sort of down on the ground and connected with the earth. And then all of a sudden it became this like straight upright sort of operation. And it became very focused on sort of this upper part of our body. We became so disconnected specifically from this lower energy center. But we still talk about it. We still talk about how, you know, we have a gut feeling or, you know, sort of a woman's intuition, right? These sort of like catchphrases that remind us that there is a knowing in this lower part of our body, but so many of us have been really like kind of cut off from that. I used to joke like, oh, you could just cut me off at the neck and I'd still be able to think circles around people, because my whole life I've just been so logical. And I think that was kind of the real awakening for me was, whoa, there's so much information available to me through my body and through this menstrual cycle and other faculties that I have. It was just like mind blowing, like literally like, I just like, my mind was blown and all of a sudden I was back in my body and it was amazing. And it's taken a lot of like sort of unlearning and a lot of deprogramming the way that my body has been trained to respond through capitalism. And, you know, one of the things that I talk about, mostly like in conversations with clients is this sort of, this obsession with diet culture, or with, you know, the fat phobia culture, this idea that like we're supposed to be thin and skinny and very childlike in our bodies. And it really makes me so angry. Every time someone hops into my DMs to try and sell me a diet, I just tell them all about it. Like, no, that's not the way. And like, you know, I'm kind of rambling here, but you know, to go back to what you were saying about this disconnection from the power of the menstrual cycle, it really breaks my heart. It's this double-edged sword of like, we were disconnected from that power and sort of made reliant, or at least the illusion of reliance on this system. And because we feel reliant on the system, it's harder for us to get back to honoring that cycle. You know, like I really try to take my day one of my menstrual cycle, the first day of my bleed, I try to take that off work. Sometimes I feel like I can't. Sometimes I feel like, like, you know, someone paid me a lot of money to do this, or someone, you know, and so I still am deprogramming from that. And also I've sort of, the way that I operate, like, you know, I'm sitting here on my floor right now in my comfy clothes chatting with you. And so I've kind of made sure that part of the way that I present myself in my business is that sort of, I'm going to take care of myself. And if I show up and my hair's in a ponytail and I'm just wearing my comfy clothes, like that's the way I'm showing up. But it's really hard. It's really hard to kind of flip that switch. And for me, it's been, you know, a process of almost 10 years of figuring out how do I operate in a way that really honors my body, but also allows me to sustain myself and to kind of be a disruptor in the system. And it's a process. It's like ongoing. Every cycle I have to learn how to show up in a way that feels good for me, but that's also, I'm not sure what the word is that I'm looking there, but like operational in the system. It's
Yeah.
like we currently kind of have to do both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all we can do is all we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I really hope that people start to really take care of themselves and put themselves and their communities first, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess that we're in. It's coming together and doing the work together.
Mm-hmm. And I love that what you bring here as we're wrapping up about how we can approach this, because the capitalist model would be to say, oh, the system isn't working. Let's destroy it all in one fell swoop and come in with this new system that is going to be better, right? But what I hear you saying instead is, okay, here we are in this system. Let's be operational as we can, and at the same time really starting to honor, reclaim this process of connecting with the body and letting it be a gradual process, and letting ourselves do the best we can without having to be the best.
Yes.
Which is the whole capitalist model, is if you're good enough, then you are worthy of having success, right? And so everybody's trying to be the best instead of let's do the best we can in any given moment and have compassion for ourselves and gentleness with ourselves and connect with our body and with each other and live in as healthy of ways as we can. So I really appreciate you bringing that here as we're wrapping up our time together. If anyone wants to connect with you and learn more about your work or just have a conversation, how might they do so?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on my website, laurenelizabethcoaching.com, all one word. I also do have like a community membership portal, which you can reach out to me to get access to that. It's called Uncommon Ground, and we're sort of rebuilding what it looks like to be in community and building business in a way that's very radical together. But yeah, checking out on connecting with me on my website is probably the best. I'm very, very present on my email. You can also connect with me on Instagram, which my handle is at lauren.elizabeth.coaching. And I can send you those links if it's helpful to put them in the show notes. But yeah, I would love to connect with folks, just have a conversation, or if you're interested in some of what I've talked about today and kind of bringing that into your own work. Thank you so much, Sama, for this conversation. And yeah, it feels good to be talking with folks who get it and who are also committed to this and creating new systems for the way that we support one another and support ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. And as listeners know, if you want to learn more about the Womb-Centered Healing Temple and the Biomystical Womb Apprenticeship Program, which is collecting a growing number of work trade participants this year, which is a lovely thing because I'm getting help with all the different aspects of putting on a program like that. And so there's this real win-win situation. There's a team forming. So if you want to be part of the team of people that are that we're putting together this 13-month apprenticeship program together instead of just me by myself. Yay, a whole community around reorienting towards womb reverence individually and collectively. So you can check it out at wombcenteredhealing.com. All right. Well, that's all for now. Any last words, reflections?
Just really grateful to have this conversation. And I really hope that folks can take something away that feels resonant and helpful for the work that they're doing.
Well, I know I certainly have. So I really want to thank you for coming on here and furthering this conversation. And lovely to be with you. So that's all for now. Until next time.